the one who breaks the darkness with a liberating light. Praise the one who frees the prisoners, turning blindness into sight.
Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today's text is the Gospel reading from Luke chapter 20. One day, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes with the elders came up and said to him, "Tell us, by what authority you do these things, or who it is that gave you this authority?" He answered them, "I also will ask you a question. Now tell me, was the baptism of John from heaven or from man?" And they discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say, 'From heaven,' he will say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say, 'From man,' all the people will stone us to death, for they are convinced that John was a prophet." So they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." And he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, and let it out to tenants, and went into another country for a long while. When the time came, he sent a servant to the tenants so that they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent another servant, but they also beat and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent yet a third. This one also they wounded and cast out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son, perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they said to themselves, "This is the heir. Let us kill him, so that the inheritance may be ours." And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, "Surely not." But he looked directly at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone it will crush him." The scribes and the chief priests sought to lay hands on him at that very hour, for they perceived that he had told this parable against them, but they feared the people. So they watched him, and sent spies who pretended to be sincere, that they might catch him in something he said, so as to deliver him up to the authority and jurisdiction of the governor. So they asked him, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly, and show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not?" But he perceived their craftiness, and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have?" And they said, "Caesar's." He said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were not able in the presence of the people to catch him in what he said, but marveling at his answer, they became silent. There came to him some Sadducees, those who deny that there is a resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife but no children, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first took a wife and died without children, and the second and the third took her, and likewise all 7 left no children and died. Afterward the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had her as wife." And Jesus said to them, "The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die any more, because they are equal to angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But that the dead are raised, even Moses shows in the passage about the bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is not God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him." Then some of the scribes answered, "Teacher, you have spoken well," for they no longer dared to ask him any question. But he said to them, "How can they say that the Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand, until I make your enemies your footstool.' David thus calls him Lord, so how is he his son?" And in the hearing of all the people he said to his disciples, "Beware the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and love greetings in the marketplaces and the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. This is the word of the Lord. This is all happening in Holy Week. Keep that context in mind. So it starts out with the words one day as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel. And this is what he does for most of Holy Week. I mean, he arrives on Sunday. He spends Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday likely teaching in the temple. So this is one of those days that conversation is going to take place. The same people that we saw in yesterday's chapter, right at the end, verse 47 of chapter 19, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders or principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him. Those same people come to him now and challenge his authority. Where does this authority come from that you can teach in this way, that you can do these miracles? That's the question. And Jesus, he knows that they're trying to trap him, so he traps them back. He offers up a question, basically, okay, you've asked me one, I'll ask you one. If you answer mine, I'll answer yours. He's making a deal with them. But he's asking them a question he knows they won't answer. It's a trap for them. So, John's baptism, from heaven or from man? They go to the side. They discuss it amongst themselves. And you can see their conversation. They know he has them whichever way they answer. If they say that John came from heaven, why didn't you believe him? But if they say that John came from among men and thus was not godly, but was just doing something a man might do, then the people would be upset because the people held John as a prophet. So they're trapped. They don't want to give either of those answers to Jesus in the midst of the crowd in the temple, and so they say they don't know. They have refused to answer, and because they refuse to answer, Jesus refuses to answer them. And he sneaks his way out of their little game by this question. Now, you can, for your own children, ask them by what authority Jesus does these things, right? They know. Jesus can heal because he comes from God. Jesus can forgive sins because Jesus is God, right? That's the picture that we want to have. It's God's authority that Jesus does this with. Now, next you move into a parable, and this is one of those that maybe you ask your children first if they can unpack the parable before you unpack it for them, right? I mean, you read it together and then see if they can explain it to you. The parable of the wicked tenants. You have the man plants a vineyard, then he disappears, right? He leaves for a while, goes to another place, and he sends his servants to collect the fruit at harvest time so that he can have income from his land, his vineyard. And the tenants, those he left in charge of that place, they abuse his servants, they beat them, and they don't send the master his due. And then he sends his son, and they oddly think to themselves that if they kill the son, they will have the vineyard, right? I mean, look at that. This is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance may be ours. This is as ridiculous as our sinful rebellion is in the first place. Our rebellion against God is ridiculous. It has no basis in anything good. When you stop and think about it, it's just wrong. And that's what their idea is here. How does killing the son make the inheritance theirs? You can't earn an inheritance. You're either part of the family or you're not, and they're not. So even if they kill the son, the master, isn't going to give this vineyard to them. Whether he realizes they killed his son or not, he probably will because they've already beaten his servants. He's not giving this to them. He's going to have them arrested. And, even worse, he actually has them destroyed, which they deserved. So we all deserve that for our sin, by the way. One sin deserves death. So they deserve the outcome that they receive. So unpacking the parable with your children, the man is God, right? He plants a vineyard. He makes this creation, and he makes all of us. You could even say that the tenants, in a sense, were Adam and Eve at first. You could talk about how the devil ended up stealing the kingdom away. as God had entrusted his good creation to his people, and they gave it over to the devil in Genesis 3. But ultimately, it's the whole of the Jewish people that is a referent here, the Old Testament people of Israel. They've rejected God. They rejected the prophets that the Lord sent. And so eventually he even sends his son, Jesus. This is John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. God was trying to harvest us. We are the fruit of the vineyard that he was seeking. And they killed him, thinking that they could then have their run of creation, have their run of faith, and do it however they pleased to do. So Jesus here is actually forecasting his own death in this parable. And so God will destroy those people, as God destroys by sending to hell in his righteous judgment. And he will give the vineyard to others. He will give the gifts that he has to give. He will give his new creation even to others, and that's the Gentiles. That's the idea that the gospel of Jesus Christ is not just for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. It is for all of us. The reaction of the people to this parable is interesting. They respond, surely not. The Lutheran Study Bible's footnote notes that this is Paul's favorite phrase. Well, maybe not his favorite phrase, but he says this a lot. In Greek, it's me genoita, which may it not be, may it not happen. Romans 6 is an example of that. Shall we go on in sin that grace may abound? Paul's response. So what are the people saying surely not to? By Jesus' response to them in verse 17, it appears that the people are saying surely not to the idea that these tenants would behave in such a way. Because Jesus then says, he talks about how the stone is rejected. That's his go-to, and it's Psalm 118, verse 22. Jesus is the stone that was rejected, and yet that is the stone. Jesus is the plan, right? He's the one that God has planned to build his new creation around. The church is the bride of Christ. Jesus is the cornerstone. I don't know that you have to get into building language per se. You can if you'd like to. With your children as you discuss this together. But verse 18 has caused a lot of confusion before, and in fairness, rightly so. What Jesus says, what's he getting at? Here's a couple of options in verse 18. It could be a statement of double judgment. So this cornerstone, this Jesus and his word, as he speaks and the people reject him, that leads to damnation. And so it could be synonymous, Jesus basically repeating himself twice. Judged and judged because they have rejected Christ. I have heard an alternative perspective on this, that the first clause is actually faith and the second clause is judgment. So let me spell that one out a little bit. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces. Falling on the stone, falling upon Christ, that would be I guess you could even use that language for violence. That's the double judgment picture, though. So here, this would be the idea of us falling at the foot of the cross, right? As we bow down before God in worship and we entrust all of me to him. I am a miserable sinner. I, a poor, miserable sinner, confess unto you. And we lay it all down at the foot of the cross. We are broken into pieces. The old Adam in us is broken as we repent, and the Lord forgives. Versus, again, the second part being judgment. That's a picture I've heard. So I'm going to leave you with that one. A couple of options to consider with the text. Now, as we then move into the next section, the traps continue to be sprung. The scribes and the chief priests, they realize that he has spoken this against them, and they are still afraid to move against Jesus. Once again, the reminder here, we're pointing forward to what Judas Iscariot does. This is the importance of his betrayal. They weren't going to act because they were afraid of the crowds. Judas, for 30 pieces of silver, gives them the location of Jesus away from the crowd so that they aren't afraid to act. That's the betrayal. That's what that's about. So as we then look to here, they want to kill him, but they can't. So they're trying to give him to the authorities. That would be Pilate, because he can kill them. So they send spies to trap him. This is a trap that they think they have very cleverly thought out. Now, noteworthily here, the spies are liars, right? They do not believe the things that they say. They do not believe Jesus speaks rightly or teaches rightly. They do not believe that he teaches truly the ways of God. If they did, they wouldn't be trying to trap him. Lying is a sin. Lying is not good. So that's something to beware of as we teach our children the faith. Here's their question. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? Paying taxes is another way you hear that expressed, and I think that's through Matthew's gospel account. And here's your trap. If he says, no, it's not lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, they can turn him over to the Roman soldiers for inciting rebellion among the people, right? How much would the Jewish people like to hear not to pay taxes? How much would you like to hear you don't have to pay taxes? It's the same thing. They would rejoice, and it would start an uprising, cause trouble. Rome would squash that. That's one option. The other option is, he says to pay taxes. What happens if Jesus says to pay your taxes? The people turn against him, and then he's not a problem for them anymore. Everybody else will turn against him. They might even riot against him. So, they think they have him. He's able to get out of this one just as easily and wisely as he did the first challenge of the chapter, and he asks for a denarius. Show me the coin that would be used to pay the tax. And he looks at it, and he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. Now, that's enough for them. They marvel at his response. They become silent. But I would challenge you to think about this one more deeply, because it would appear in the text nobody actually gets it. Ask your children, what belongs to Caesar? And what belongs to God? Everything in creation belongs to God. Jesus actually just told them not to pay the tax. They had what they wanted if they thought this through. But they didn't. Because they're not thinking that light. They're not thinking about all of creation being God's, just like we often don't think that way either, right? It's my house, my clothes, my job, my paycheck. No, it all belongs to God. He just entrusts it to you to use for the love of others. Quite a picture that is just missed. All right, then we go to verse 27, another trap. So the Pharisees step aside, enter the Sadducees. These are both different ruling groups of religious people among the Jewish peoples. The Sadducees and the Pharisees oppose one another. The Sadducees believe that there is no resurrection, as Luke says right there, and they also don't believe in angels. Important notes for that. Now, they ask Jesus a question as well. They're trying to show the ridiculousness of a resurrection idea based on the Old Testament law. So Old Testament law, Deuteronomy chapter 25, you can read about something called levirate marriage. If your brother dies without producing an heir, without having a son, then you are to take his wife into your house, and the first son that would be born by her is to be considered your brother's child, and any inheritance that he would have had would go to that child. The whole purpose of levirate marriage in that system then is about the inheritance. It is the passing on of the promise of God through the tribe of Israel and the promised land, that they would stay in the promised land, and eventually a Savior is going to come from one of those tribes too. All of that's caught up. There is also the idea of caring for the widow and providing for her. Again, the Sadducees don't believe any of this. So they go through, okay, Jesus, there were 7 brothers. All 7 of them married this woman. All 7 of them die. Whose wife is she in the resurrection? They don't believe there is a resurrection. It's a trick. They just want to make Jesus look foolish. They want to make his belief in the resurrection look foolish. Jesus responds to them in the same kind of words that he used about judgment back in chapter 17, verse 27. The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. Remember that text? How he says that about the time of Noah before the flood hit? Just as the Son of Man's judgment will come at a time when that isn't expected. So it's interesting that he uses those words again here. Then he talks about those who are worthy to attain. That would be those who have faith. The resurrection from the dead are going to be equal to angels. I just want to point that out here real quickly. He mentions both of the things that the Sadducees are noted as not believing in the New Testament. Both the resurrection and angels. He throws them both in his answer. Both of them are real, right? They're both true. Basically, Jesus' argument against them here is that things aren't going to work in the resurrection like they work now. He doesn't unpack that for them any more than that. He just lays this out there, and we don't hear any more from the Sadducees. God is the God of the living, not of the dead, is another point he makes. The Sadducees go silent, and instead we hear from the scribes that they respond Jesus has answered well. They're pleased that Jesus just shut up the Sadducees. Again, rivalries amongst the people here. Since they no longer will ask Jesus a question, he asks them a question. He stumps them with one, which is from Psalm 110, verse 1, that David calls the Messiah, the Christ, his own Lord. How is that possible if the Christ is a son of David? This isn't how authority would work, right? The king would be David. His son would just be his son. Jesus is trying to show that the Messiah is God in the flesh. All right, and then lastly here today, we have Jesus warning the disciples about these very scribes that we just saw, that they revel in being seen, and that they are disaster for people's faith, and they are harmful. Specifically mentioned will be the widows, and we will see that again tomorrow. So bear this in mind. You could actually read the beginning of chapter 21 as you finish this text, or tomorrow as you read chapter 21, read the end of this text, because these things need to be seen together. We'll talk about that tomorrow in chapter 21.
Let us praise the Word incarnate, Christ who suffered in our place. Jesus died and rose victorious, that we may know God by grace. Let us sing.